If you don't know me, my name's Jack McCauley. I retired as the commander of the Maryland State Police Licensing Division. I was a captain with the state police. I kind of cut my teeth down here on the shore. I was assigned to the Eastern Barrack out of the police academy. And I spent quite a bit down here in Salisbury. My first promotion, in fact, came here where I worked in a drug unit, and I was eventually promoted to into a homicide unit, the first original homicide unit of the state police ever had. So I just want to take a few minutes today, and I want to tell you a little bit about my background, how I rose to the position where I held, and the significance of your Second Amendment rights and what's happening in Maryland today. And hopefully you guys will have some questions, and maybe I can help you out with some of those things. I grew up in Western Maryland, Garrett County. If you guys have ever been there, there's maybe Deep Creek Lake area. It's a small town. I didn't live a fearful life other than my mother. My mother would work me to death. My mother was a coal miner's daughter. She didn't have a lot of money. We made a lot out of Spam growing up, you know. We had, anybody ever have Spam dinners? Pretty good. But the importance of that was that I had a tremendous amount of respect. My mother never did anything for herself, ever. She always did it for others. She was serving God. She was serving the church. She was in the community. She was engaged. And so that's how I was taught. I was taught that you always gave of yourself to others first. And that was very important. Well, guess what? The state police, when I found that family, I wanted to be a trooper from the time I was 5 years old. I wanted to do nothing else in my life. I don't know what I would have done if I wasn't hired by the state police, because it was the only thing I ever knew and the only thing I wanted to do. So right out of high school, I joined. And it fit me perfectly because that department was so crisp for me, and they supported those same values that I had. And they did for most of my career. In fact, they still do. There's a great group of people. And I often talk about law enforcement strategies, and I use this area of Salisbury as an example of how we can make that change. When I was promoted to a commander of a gang unit, we had one gang investigator in Salisbury. Anybody ever hear of gangs in Salisbury? Any gang activity? There's real. Salisbury has a significant gang issue, and it was up and coming. So I was given the reins to be the gang commander, and I got 4 guys. 4. I want you to think, if you have a company or have ever run a business, what 4 people would mean to your business. It doesn't sound like a lot. When you're looking at an outside and you're talking about 4 guys, 4 people, it doesn't mean a lot. In 2009 in Salisbury, in less than 12 months, they had 22 gang-involved shootings. So we formed this gang unit, and these guys looked at me and said, "We have to do something." I said, "Well, you tell me. You guys have worked here." They were Salisbury City police officers, 3 of them before. 1 of them had been a county police officer. They all came in the state police. And I let them go. I didn't come up with these ideas, but I said we have to, excuse my language, we have to get off our ass and knock on doors. And that's the best thing that you can do in police work. I use this acronym all the time called GOYACOD. Get off your ass and knock on doors. That means get to the street, reach the people, and serve them. Serve them, help them, make them more of a priority in your life than others. The same thing my mother taught me. Well, these guys did that. They went from 22 shootings, gang-involved shootings in a 12-month period to an 18-month period with 1. Just 4 guys hitting the street. 4 guys. So why is that significant? Because that's how you reduce crime in Maryland. That's how you make a difference. You go to your basic core principles. I've only met one other cop that I think is one of the best cops that I've ever met. Coincidentally, he's your sheriff here in the county. Like him or not, he's one of the best cops I've ever met. He understands crime reduction strategies, and that's important. I've never seen a county or a jurisdiction ever like this where the state's attorney's so plugged in, where the Salisbury City Police, where the county police all are united in one effort. This is the example of, this could be, like, you've heard Salisbury at times called mini Baltimore. Probably somebody's heard that. It could be Baltimore if the police work wasn't done right, if your community wasn't bought in, if they weren't serving that. But here's what happened. I also, when I got promoted to the commander of a gang unit, I also got promoted to commander of a gun unit, firearms enforcement unit. And one of the guys was here in Salisbury. And, you know, we were taking some guns off the street. We were running around the state. But for the first time, I had gone from being a detective, you know, investigating homicides and shootings, to an administrator at a barrack, to now I'm seeing things at a different level. And I'm seeing the way police work's starting to happen, and I'm starting to kind of get a bad taste in my mouth for how we're facing gun crime in Maryland. I was really having a problem with that. Along the way, I got promoted, and they put me in the licensing division in charge of gun sales, gun background checks, handgun permits, and the like. So that's what I was doing. So when you applied to get a handgun permit, I was the one in charge. And all my life, I had been chasing bad guys. I had never really thought what it means for private Joe citizen to have a gun. In my mind, when you're a trooper and you're a bad guy, and I'm running, working 40 hours of overtime a week, the only thing I could think was, a citizen with a gun means someone's getting arrested. I never even thought, foolishly, what it meant to be a law-abiding citizen carrying a gun to protect yourself when my 4 guys couldn't be there to stop those gang members because they take days off, right? But it started to rationalize with me when I saw how the permits were being handed out. A guy came in one day and he was struggling with our temporary employee at the front desk, and she couldn't answer his questions. But he was a bricklayer in Baltimore City, and he was getting a gun permit because he was a business owner. And he was getting a renewal, and I was asking him, I remember this was like in 2 weeks after I'd been there, I said, well, you have to have a reason to get a permit. What's your reason? He said, well, I'm a business owner, and I lay bricks for a living, and I carry cash. And I was like, okay, sounds good to me. I mean, what else? What else would you get a permit for? Sounds great. That same day, I was downstairs, and a retired colonel from the United States Marine Corps, 30 years, was there. Same exact scenario, and he wanted to get a handgun permit. I was like, Colonel, sounds great. You're retired military. Let's go get you a permit. I went upstairs and told my guys, and they're like, are you kidding me? He can't get a permit. He doesn't have a good reason. I said, well, I don't understand. He fought for our country. He put his life on the line for 30 years. He's got a clean background. This is what he wanted a permit for. He walked his dog in a neighborhood, and it was dangerous, but he didn't want to give up. He wanted a restriction. He even knew about the restrictions, and he just wanted to carry that gun to walk his dog. And the guys are like, we can't do that. That's not our policy. We don't do that. So that opened my eyes. That same week, less than a week later, I was called. I'm brand new in the unit. I don't even know what's going on. My head's spinning. I have so many personnel that I'm in charge of, and I get sent down to the legislature to testify on a bill. I don't even know what it was about, some regulation. They just put a piece of paper in front of me to read. Well, the legislators started asking me questions about ammo logs and things like that. And I'm like, oh, I'm not answering that. Let me tell you something. That place was rocking because there were 2 legislators, and they were ready to tear me up. They were angry. They were hostile because I refused to answer questions about something that I didn't think I was there for. And that was my wake-up call because I left there, and I went, well, what am I doing? What are my values? What am I doing? What am I in charge of, and what are we doing? I'd been upset. I'd even been involved in a lot of issues, I'll say, with how guns were being seized in Maryland and what we were doing. I was yelling at the governor's office, you guys just want us to seize gun numbers. It didn't matter for what. We could go out to Western Maryland and take guns from people as long as they got numbers of guns. And I remember talking to my supervisor about that, and I'm like, why are we just seizing guns? Why aren't we going after bad guys? He said, that's not what it's about, Jack. That's not what it's about. The governor's office doesn't want to know all that stuff. They want to know how many guns you're seizing. I'm like, but that's like emptying the ocean with a teaspoon, right? We're going to empty the water with a teaspoon. Taking guns, with 400 million guns in the United States, the fact of going out and seizing guns for the sake of seizing guns didn't make sense to me. So I started putting all this stuff together, and for the first time, I slowed down and took a step back and started analyzing what was happening. And I thought about what that state delegate did. Why was he so angry at me? Because I was taking people's rights. I was the representative that was responsible for that, and I had a duty to serve our citizens. Before that could unwrap, Maryland, it was in the middle of a lawsuit. That lawsuit was on a carry permit. I was ready. I'm like, yes, here we go. We are going to issue permits. Citizens are going to get permit. This good and substantial requirement that I now recognize was so unfair and so arbitrary. The administration of this process was, you get a gun, you don't. It was like, has anybody watched the Soup Nazi on TV? What's the Jerry Seinfeld show? No soup for you, soup for you. That's really what it was, and it hasn't changed. But I couldn't do anything because we were pending a lawsuit. In the meantime, I get sent down as an expert on gun enforcement to the Maryland legislature. Now they're putting in Firearms Safety Act of 2013. My first meeting was with the Speaker of the House. Yeah, I'm going to call him out. Because he wanted me to explain to him about magazines and magazine capacities. I literally took the magazine out of my gun to show him that, and he said, "What's that?" I said, "That's a magazine." He said, "It's made of metal." "Yes, sir." He said, "So when you shoot that, though, you throw that away and that's done?" I said, "No, sir, they're not disposable." "Oh, well, how long is that good for?" I said, that'll last me longer than my lifetime. My son will have it, and probably his son. It's not disposable. I got a complaint the next morning that I confused him. I want you to think about that. Now, he had no idea. He was pushing an agenda for gun control, common sense gun control, right? When he has no idea what a magazine even does, or what a high capacity magazine even is. I went through 90 days of arguments and discussions just like that. At one point, I got asked by a state delegate in a backdoor meeting with the governor's office of a question about crimes that are committed with assault weapons. And before I could answer it, the governor's representative said, "Jack, don't answer that question." Well, the fight was on. That delegate and her were in an argument, and I was just sitting back in disbelief. We left that meeting, and I kind of nudged her. I was like, why didn't you want me to answer that question? She said, "Because that's a policy question. This isn't about policy. This is about votes." I said, what do you mean about votes? This is about O'Malley running for president. This bill is about votes. I literally had to stop another trooper I was with. I thought he was going to strangle her. He was so upset because here we are, representatives of the people. He himself had proposed 22 corrections to current legislation that would truly make a difference. This man fought gun crime for 30 years. That was his job. And he had 22 suggestions. They wouldn't give him one of those to put in a bill to fix the laws that we already had. They wanted to put another feel-good bill out. So he had some true fixes. So I really became frustrated with that. But I want to bring you back to that. I want to bring you back to me being down here in Salisbury and running this gang unit. I say I ran it. These guys did their own thing. I left them alone. That's what a good supervisor does. You put good people in charge, and then you leave them alone to do their job. But that bill took 19 Maryland State troopers out of the highway. Could you imagine if we put 19 troopers here in Salisbury today? If 4 gang members can take 22 shootings and turn it into 1 in less than 1 year, just by Goya cod, getting off their ass and knocking on doors, could you imagine what those 19 state troopers are doing now sitting in an office at Pikesville, and they're processing paperwork? When you go buy a gun, the first thing you do is get your fingerprints, and that triggers a background investigation, right? Background investigation number 1. Then you go fill out an application and pay $10. That triggers the same background investigation again. You have to wait 7 days, right? But before that, you have to get an HQL. That's the exact same background investigation, a handgun qualification license. Now you've had 3 background investigations. That takes time and manpower, right? That takes personnel and manpower. Those 4 troopers out on the road, could you imagine what one more gang investigator would do in Salisbury for you to reduce real gun crime? But now every time you buy a gun, another background check. And it goes on and on and on. And that's not just one person doing that background check. That sounds really simple, right? Here's what happens. They run 13 databases. Then another guy has to process the paperwork. Then they have to bill the sporting goods store who's selling it. Then they have to receive that bill. Then they have to enter all this into computer manually. Then they have to have quality control for every background check, right? You see where I'm going with that? Then they have to file this. They don't even have the personnel to file it, so it cost me $20,000 a month in overtime to do these background checks because they didn't have enough people to do it. That's for around 200 background checks a week. Right now I saw some senator in PG County or delegate put in a bill this year to do common sense background checks. Again, we'll use that word common sense, on all guns, long guns, everything. That would take them from about 200 background checks a week to 5,200. How many of those troopers are coming out of the highways or out of your communities where they're protecting you to do that? This is my thing, and I tell this all the time. I was on Fox News not too long ago to talk about common sense background checks, common sense gun laws. The common sense is doing good police work from the beginning. The common sense is putting people in jail who have committed the crimes. In Baltimore City, if you follow, there's a Facebook page called Nolly Prosecute Project. It's amazing. he has tracked for the last 3 years every arrest in Baltimore City. 85 to 90% of gun violators have already committed 1 to 2 offenses previously. Many of them have committed murder less than 4 years ago and are back out on the street. Charges are null pros after null pros after null pros. It's like a business, folks. Reducing crime is a matter of manpower and personnel and time. What do you do with that manpower and personnel and time? You make the best of it. If you're going to do common sense background checks and you're going to extend all this extra work without the manpower and resources, you're killing people. You're taking funding, $5.9 million went into that. Could you imagine what we did with the prosecutor's office in Baltimore City? Could you imagine the personnel that they could use to prosecute crimes? Or, as one delegate wanted to propose a bill to make a mandatory sentence for people committing crimes, and the chairman of the committee said, actually, let me back that up. That actually passed. Everyone voted in favor till they brought all the Democrats back in and said, hey, you guys are missing votes. There was one Democrat from Baltimore City named Nathaniel Oakes who was drunk drinking wine out of the co-chairman's office. And they had to get him because he was in getting another glass of wine because he missed the vote. And they had to go back and pull him up to re-vote to make sure that amendment didn't pass. Because why? The chairman said we can't afford to put people in jail. We can't afford to do that. It would be too costly. One murder in Baltimore City costs close to $5 million by the end of the day. Think of the crime. Think how much crime costs. It costs more for crime prevention than it does to put someone in jail for a crime, for a major crime we're talking about. So that's kind of where I fell into place. So I left after that bill was passed, and as a matter of fact, after that conversation with the governor's personnel that said, this isn't about saving lives. That's really what she was telling me. She didn't say that, but that's what she was saying. This isn't about saving lives. It was about politics. It wasn't about putting self before others. It wasn't about putting others before self. It was about putting self before others. Because that's what Martin O'Malley was doing. That's what his entire staff was willing to do. And I felt like anybody under him who agreed to do that was only a part of that. So I made a really hard decision. I was 42 years old. I had risen through my ranks. I'd never been in trouble a day in my life. I decided I was going to leave and retire so I could stand here today and tell you guys the truth, because otherwise I'd been silenced. I might have been promoted. I might have had a cushy job 15 minutes from my house. I don't know. I might have been making $120,000 a year. That sounds good. But I wanted to give it up because that's what's the right thing to do. And I think some of these politicians that are making feel-good legislation need to take a look at themselves and see that what they're doing really makes a difference. The only person that I ran into in that legislature that year that really held people accountable, that really made you think, that I knew was at the core of putting others before self, was Mike Smigiel. Mike Smigiel is the man that challenged me. He's the one that woke me up. He shook that tree. So I want you guys to give him a round of applause and invite him up on stage.